We're taught to trust the uniform, to believe that the people who swear an oath to protect and serve will be there for us when we are at our most vulnerable. We see them as the safe people to run towards in a crisis. But what happens when that trust isn't just broken, but used as a weapon? What happens when the person you're supposed to run to becomes the crisis itself? This is the story of a crime that shattered a nation's faith in its own guardians. It's a story that began with a woman doing exactly what she was supposed to and ended in an act of unthinkable violence. When a police officer stopped Sarah Everard for allegedly breaking COVID-19 rules, she did what any of us would do. She listened, she complied, she trusted the uniform, and believed she was safe. But the man who showed her his warrant card wasn't there to help her. He was there to kidnap and murder her. This is the story of how a serving police officer used his power to commit one of the most shocking crimes in recent memory, and the devastating fallout from that betrayal. Before her name became tied to a national tragedy, Sarah Everard was a vibrant, smart, and deeply loved woman. Born in Surrey in 1987, she grew up in York and excelled at her studies at Durham University before making her way to the capital to build a life. At 33, she was a successful marketing executive living in Brixton, South London, surrounded by a tight-knit group of friends who called her brilliant, beautiful, and incredibly kind. She was the kind of person who lit up a room. Her laugh was infectious, and she had an adventurous spirit. Her family remembered her as a shining example to them all, a wonderful daughter and sister, whose future was full of nothing but potential. She loved her work. She loved her friends and family, and she had all the simple, relatable dreams of a life that was just getting started. On the evening of March 3rd, 2021, Sarah was doing something thousands of Londoners do every single day. She was walking home. After visiting a friend in Clapham, she started the 50-minute walk back to her flat in Brixton. It was a route she'd taken many times. She was on the phone with her boyfriend, making plans for the next day, the conversation light and completely normal. That call ended around 9:28 p.m. It was the last time anyone who knew her would ever speak to her again. Because of the nationwide COVID lockdown, the streets were quieter than usual, but this was a main road, lit by familiar streetlights and watched over by countless CCTV cameras. In these final, ordinary moments, there was no sign of the horror that was waiting for her. Sarah was simply a woman walking home, completely unaware that she was being hunted by a predator who was hiding in plain sight. A predator wearing the very uniform she was taught to trust. As Sarah Everard walked along the A205 South Circular, a car pulled up. The man who stepped out was Wayne Couzens, a 48-year-old officer with the Metropolitan Police. He was off duty, but he had his police-issue warrant card and a pair of handcuffs. To anyone watching, he was the law. He approached Sarah, and in an act of pure calculated evil, he staged a fake arrest. He accused her of breaking COVID lockdown rules, an accusation that in the middle of a pandemic carried real weight. A couple driving by actually saw it happen. They saw a police officer with a woman who seemed compliant, like she was being arrested. They didn't think twice. Why would they? The man looked official. The woman wasn't struggling. She was doing what she was told, believing, as any of us would, that this was all above board. Couzens put Sarah in handcuffs, led her to his rental car, and drove away. This was the ultimate betrayal. He didn't need to use the kind of physical force you might picture in a violent abduction. He used the power of his job. He twisted the public's trust in the police, a trust that our entire society is built on. He turned his warrant card, a symbol of safety, into a tool for kidnapping. From that moment, Sarah's fate was sealed. Couzens drove her 80 miles to Kent. There he raped her, and then strangled her to death with his police belt. It was a crime of shocking brutality, planned and carried out with cold, methodical precision. Afterwards, he bought petrol to burn her body, hiding her remains in a pond in a quiet patch of woodland he owned near Ashford. The man who had sworn an oath to uphold the law had just committed the most terrible crimes imaginable, all while banking on the idea that his job put him above any suspicion. The protector had become the predator, and in doing so, he lit a fuse that would set off an explosion within the very institution he represented. When Sarah's friends and family couldn't reach her, a knot of unease began to tighten. It was completely unlike her to just disappear. Her boyfriend officially reported her missing on March 4th. The Metropolitan Police launched an investigation, but as the hours turned into days, the search grew more and more desperate. The public threw themselves into the effort. Sarah's face was on posters, her name shared all over social media. Everyone was asking the same question: what happened to Sarah Everard? Investigators started the long, difficult work of retracing her steps. They tracked her route home, begging for witnesses or dashcam footage. The breakthrough came from a CCTV camera on a passing London bus. The footage, captured at 9:35 p.m. on the night she vanished, was grainy, but it was damning. It showed Sarah Everard standing next to a car with its hazard lights on, and standing right there with her was a man. That one piece of evidence changed everything. It proved Sarah hadn't just vanished. Someone had stopped her. The investigation now had a car to look for. Police traced the rental to a man named Couzens, and when they ran that name through their system, the sickening truth started to come out. The man who rented that car wasn't just some random citizen, he was one of their own, a serving police officer in the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command. On March 9th, 6 days after Sarah was last seen, armed officers swarmed Couzens' home in Deal, Kent. He was arrested, at first on suspicion of kidnapping, but as the police searched his property, any hope of finding Sarah alive began to fade. The next day, March 10th, they found human remains in the woods near his house. Dental records soon confirmed the unthinkable. It was Sarah. The charge against Couzens was now murder. The news hit the country like a physical blow. The man charged with this terrible crime wasn't some stranger in the shadows. He was a police officer paid to protect the public. The investigation had found the truth, but that truth was more terrifying than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just a story about a woman being attacked. It was about a fundamental betrayal of trust that forced a painful question: if you can't trust a police officer, who can you trust? Couzens was a monster hiding in plain sight, and his police uniform was the perfect disguise for a man with a long history of disturbing behavior. The investigation into his past uncovered a terrifying pattern of red flags and missed chances, a chain of systemic failures that allowed a predator to not only join the police force but to stay in it. Years before he murdered Sarah Everard, Couzens had been reported for indecent exposure. Back in 2015, Kent police got a complaint about a man driving naked from the waist down. They even identified the car as his, but nothing was done, and that wasn't a one-off. Just days before he kidnapped Sarah, another report of indecent exposure was filed against him at a fast food restaurant in South London. The Metropolitan Police didn't properly investigate that one either. These weren't just small slip-ups. They were critical failures. An independent inquiry led by Lady Eilish Angelini, published in February 2024, stated that Couzens should never have been a police officer in the first place. The inquiry found that multiple police forces, Kent Police, the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, and the Met, all failed to spot the obvious warning signs. The vetting procedures were a complete mess, allowing him to slip through the cracks again and again. He managed to transfer between different forces, even joining an elite armed unit, without his history of alleged sexual offenses ever being properly looked into. There was evidence of his interest in violent extreme pornography and allegations of sexual crimes going back almost 2 decades before he murdered Sarah. When he was finally arrested, Couzens' first instinct was to lie. He made up a wild story about being forced into the kidnapping by an Eastern European gang. But the evidence against him was just overwhelming. His car was on CCTV. His phone data put him at the scene of the abduction and near where Sarah's body was found, and her DNA was in his car. With nowhere left to run, he finally dropped the act. On June 8, 2021, Wayne Couzens pleaded guilty to the kidnap and rape of Sarah Everard. A month later, he pleaded guilty to her murder. At his sentencing, the court heard the chilling details of how he had planned the crime for at least a month and used his police ID as his weapon of choice. The judge gave him the harshest sentence possible in the UK, a whole life order. He will die in prison. An appeal to reduce his sentence was rejected, with judges confirming the crime was so exceptionally evil that it warranted a life behind bars. But while one man was brought to justice, the story was far from over. His conviction had exposed a deep sickness inside the institution he belonged to, raising profound questions about the culture of policing and the safety of women. The murder of Sarah Everard by a serving police officer wasn't just a single awful crime. It was a moment of national reckoning. It caused a massive collapse in public trust, especially among women, and it dragged deep systemic problems within British policing out into the open. The case became a turning point, forcing a very uncomfortable look at institutional misogyny, failed vetting, and a culture that had protected its own for far too long. In the aftermath, a poll showed that nearly half of all women in the UK said they trusted the police less. The very organization meant to keep them safe had become a source of fear. That feeling was only confirmed by 2 huge reports: the Baroness Casey Review in 2023 and Part 1 of the Angelini Inquiry in 2024. Both painted a devastating picture of the Metropolitan Police. The Casey Review concluded the force was institutionally racist, misogynistic, and homophobic, with a culture of denial that allowed predatory officers to go unchallenged. It described how banter was used as a cover for toxic behavior, and how the system failed to screen out people who wanted power just so they could abuse it. The Angelini Inquiry said the same, stating flatly that Wayne Couzens never should have been an officer, and that multiple forces missed their chance to stop him. It called for a complete overhaul of police vetting, recruitment, and misconduct rules across the country. It recommended that any report of indecent exposure be treated as seriously as a hands-on sexual assault, highlighting how a lack of training and motivation meant that violence against women just wasn't being taken seriously enough. In response, the government and police have promised big changes. New rules in 2025 are designed to make it easier to fire officers who fail vetting and to automatically suspend anyone accused of a serious crime. There's been talk of a zero-tolerance approach to misogyny and a big push to improve training and get rid of toxic cultures. But for many, these changes feel like too little, too late, and they don't get to the heart of the deep-rooted cultural problems. Rebuilding that shattered public trust is a monumental task. The Angelini Inquiry is still going, with its next part set to look at the broader issues of police culture and women's safety. The case of Sarah Everard forced the UK to look at an ugly truth: that the systems designed to protect people had failed on the most basic level. The fight for real, lasting change is far from over, as a nation tries to heal from a crime that revealed not just the evil of one man, but the failings of an entire institution. The issues of police reform and violence against women are complicated, and the conversation is far from over. If you want to understand more about the cases that shape our world, please subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that matter. We encourage you to share your thoughts on this case respectfully in the comments below. The murder of Sarah Everard left a permanent scar on the UK. It's a story that shows us just how fragile trust really is, and how devastating the consequences are when that power is abused. While one man is in prison for the rest of his life, the case held a mirror up to the institutions that are supposed to protect us, and it revealed deep, disturbing flaws. The calls for reform are loud, and promises have been made, but the true test of justice will be whether real action is taken to make sure a betrayal like this can never happen again. Sarah Everard's life was full of light and promise. Her memory has to be honored not just with sadness, but with a real, unwavering commitment to building a safer world for everyone.